So this work really was based on two big pieces of work that had already happened. So from a clinical perspective, it was based upon the minimum data set, because this enabled hip fracture registries who were already aligned to be in a position to want to contribute to this work. And it was also based on the Odyssey community. So this is a community that are very diverse, that aim to bring together evidence to improve healthcare decisions. These people are all across the world and are mostly data scientists with some clinicians as well. And broadly, the aim of this was the first time that the Odyssey community had thought about bringing together surgical registries. And the idea was, although this is quite a complex diagram, you take your data and move it into a common data structure, and this enables you to work together more easily. You work together in a federated network analysis, and by this what happens is that each data partner has their own data in their home institution. It never leaves, but they make a copy of their data set which is mapped to this common data model. What you're then able to do is use standardized analytical packages and reproducible analytical pipelines to bring data together and to reproduce across many different sites. And that can be whether they are registries or electronic healthcare records or other forms of data as well. The first part of this work was the bit that was slightly more boring, and that was actually thinking about how the MCD would map into the common data model. And this is where the grant came in, because that was what Eden was supporting, was clinicians and knowledge experts working with data scientists to try and make the recipe for how you would convert your data into the common data model. So what happened this week? Here's the rundown for those of you who weren't there, or those of you who've lived through it. So we did a study-a-thon, and the way that we interpreted that word is that you're using data at scale, you're doing a reproducible analysis, and you're doing it within a high-profile event. So rather than talking offline and emailing and having multiple calls, you're doing it all in one space. We started with a good research idea, and one of the things that everyone who came really worked on was working through a protocol to make it as robust as possible and to represent what we really wanted it to come together to look like. We wanted to bring together a diverse group of people, and really for me this is where I see that the FFN has its strengths. This is the survivors photo from the end of Tuesday. You can see everyone's a little bit fried. But the aim was really to think about how, as a diverse group of people, we could be more like the plot on the right than the one on the left that I feel that I often sit in as a surgeon. And what we wanted to really monopolize was that we had experts who were epidemiologists, statisticians and clinicians who all had the time and the bandwidth in one room to really think and move things forward, and line those people up with people who had data capabilities, who could really think about the study design and how we could get it to go forward. We had over 40 participants from 12 nationalities, and over 9 hip fracture registries were represented. We then really wanted to think about how to make this study robust as a use case for how we could use this going forwards. Anyone who's been watching online will have seen that the protocol that we went through and everyone commented on is now fully registered with the EMA as more of a surgical epidemiological study, and so you can go on and see that online. And also we've used GitHub, a place where you can store analytical code, and very much loved by technical people that I'm starting to learn more about. And you can see here there'll be a link to the protocol from here, and also as our results come in into the Shiny app. If you want to go to that and have a little bit of a look, that's a QR code to get to it. But you can also search, if you look for GitHub and then Bart's Bone and Joint Health, and then the Hip Fracture Study-a-thon. We touched upon using some of the efficiency tools that Odyssey have. So some of the data scientists in this group have really worked on methodologies that make it so much easier to undertake data at speed and scale. This is a screenshot of Atlas, which is a platform that you can use to make your cohorts. And one of the things that also happened on Wednesday, after having designed the protocol, was going through and making all the target cohorts of the people that we want to pick out from the registries. Results. So One of the first things that we did is because again, we're only looking at aggregated results, you're never looking inside the source data, is you want to be able to use things like Atlas to think about whether your populations are representing who you think they should. This is a screenshot of, from the National Hip Fracture Database in England of some demographic data of one of the cohorts where you can see you can look to sense check the year of birth and also the demographics as well. And it will also throw out some plots as well to look at incidence and prevalence of certain conditions, or here we've got mortality. And then the final step that we've been doing this week is running a package called Cohort Diagnostics. What this is a robust way to look at the analysis that you've made and to really see if it represents the people that you want it to represent. This is, again, one of the ways that you can look into it. So you can look at the age of the population that you have, and you can also plot more incidence trends over time so that you can identify, again, if you think clinically or statistically this looks like the cohort that you have. So I think we've got to have some shout-outs for the real winners here. So in terms of the collaborators who've been working with us, the gold stars go to Canada and Norway, who've been running packages this week in the last 3 days. They have generated their own OMOP map datasets, which are ready to use, and we're going to be working with them over the following weeks to take those forward. And also for the group below, who have also started their journeys into generating their own datasets and are coming forward and joining the journey. So, of course, you can't do everything in 3 days. And whilst the aim of this was a use case and to introduce this idea of using data innovations, it's also nice to think that we've also got a study that's behind it. And so what we've done this week is we've thought about our study design, making it robust and really representing it what we want it to represent. What we're then doing until November is we're accepting data from data partners who will be replicating the study packages. And then hopefully by the end of 2023, we'll be coming together to make that submission and think about both a informatics paper and a clinical paper to talk about how we've been the first group of surgical registries that have really come together in this way to do a federated network analysis. But as I say, this isn't really about that one study. That study is a nice way to think about how we can use this, but really, for me, this is more about future direction and to think about how FFN can do exciting things with data innovations. This can extend to include other audits, or both for this study and beyond, but also for benchmarking or for other research questions as well. And there is ways that you could add on other questions and other fields beyond the minimum MCD, the original MCD that we've been doing at this time. And it's all based upon software that is freely available, so is accessible throughout the world, and with freely available source analysis that you can use. So yeah, it's been quite a week. If anyone would like to talk to us or think about joining, please do get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is fascinating stuff, and I hope to hear from you every year from now on with some new results. Any questions or comments to this? We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, we could invite the speakers back on the stage for any questions.
I guess all of you understood everything, so that's not the...
Yes.
What?
Would you like to go to the microphone, please?
Oh, sorry. Microphone, please. It's behind you.
It looked like male and female were equal. Is that right, or was it deliberate? Or?
Oh no. So that was. So are you thinking about the screenshot from the hemiarthroplasty group? So it was predominantly female with a smaller male preponderance. That was just a screenshot. So I think it was 65-35 in that particular group. But again, this is about the reason why I didn't want to put everything up straight away is because we want to robustly look at the way we're generating the code and generating those cohorts, because you're not looking in the source data deliberately because you're doing it across a network. that you do those sense checks at that point.
If I may ask a question, for the FFN interested in global, expanding sort of our ideas globally to make everybody as good as the best are, this would be a really useful tool, I imagine. The more countries you get represented and the more important question you ask, what would be sort of a typical question you could ask to improve global hip fracture care?
Gosh, how could you improve it globally? I think it's also that you could run annualized reports where you could look at the changes. You know, certainly one of the things that we wanted to look at is over the last few years, kind of the change in pathological fractures that have come through, for example, because of the impact of people not coming forward for screening or not being able to access healthcare due to COVID. But it's really, you know, if anything that you've got in the MCD, that would be a question that you could run, you know.
Anthony Johansson.
Thanks, Jenny. Just when we did our 2017 bit of work, trying to map the existing audits at that stage, trying to do what you've done to draw the tables, which are going to be up in a minute. So I'll show people those tables, comparing the different audits and their figures. That involved me phoning a number of people here, emailing a number of people here and asking for their data, their aggregated data from their annual reports, and then checking, and then sending it back to them and saying, is this right? And they say, well, actually, no, we don't code it like that. And then we'd go backwards and forwards, and we eventually managed to write a paper, but it probably took 2 years to do that. You're in a position to do all of that instantaneously once stuff gets coded up and set up. So you're going to bypass an enormous level of complexity and can look at a lot more detail. Yeah. So I think the potential of this is huge. The idea that you can get past information governance, you've not really elaborated on how powerful a tool information governance is to make all of this impossible. You've got a way of getting past the fact that all the data in the NHFD is in a locked box that I have no access to, but you've got access to it. You've actually done that, and you can play with it in a way that I can't, even though I run it. So do you want to elaborate on the governance advantages?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly the idea is that you're never going to be sharing anything that you wouldn't be putting in a peer review publication. So when you write your code, you specifically make it an lockout so that you don't have a minimum, so you have a minimum amount in account so that you can't have a secondary disclosure of data. And more than anything, there is a lot of front work, as you say, about how you set up your data set. But the aim really is that if we have gone into this work and you have that set up, you can repeat, run the recipe for the data going into the common data model, and you could update your data so that going forward, and particularly if registries or audits are thinking about joining and setting up their MCD or how they're, new countries, one of the other arguments is whether they would want to set it up to have this automatically built in so that they would be able to then join in automatically. And that's particularly important for the Global South, for example, because we have collaborators, data science collaborators in those areas who would be very interested in that use case if that were available.
Alistair?
So congratulations on what is a massive amount of work, and I'm excited to see it taking shape. So a couple of questions. One is, what do you think the first big discoveries or new findings will be? What are you prioritizing that will be generating insights that will change things? And secondly, for registries that may join in the future, changes to MCD, is that arduous and difficult to do from now on, now that it's all set up and running?
Yeah, so I suppose if we start with that one, because that's fresh in my mind. Very much so with that, you've got a recipe, and it's written in SQL, which is not a programming language that I have to say I'm very, very good at. I've got conversational level sequel only. You have that as a recipe, and if you wanted to add questions on, you would just bolt them on. And because you're building from a structure, you're not building a wall from scratch. You've already got a couple of layers on, and then you'd just be adding those pieces on. And similarly, if we felt that something was not right in that recipe and we wanted to change it, we'd be in a position to be able to do that, and then you rerun it. It took about 2 hours to run the conversion in the National Hip Fracture Database. So in terms of the processing power and time, and because it's not a large electronic healthcare record, it takes a small amount of time, and that builds on all the methodological work that these people who are real experts in it have done, which we can utilise, which is great. In terms of this study and something new, I don't know, that you've put me on the spot there now. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to give you anything revolutionary. I think the main thing that I wanted us to show is that the power of this, and to see if you've got it across first. Because if you talk about it in an abstract sense, rather than trying to say, okay, let's look at all of these trends. And obviously we've got 12 different cohorts of patients that we're looking at, including rehabilitation interventions, as well as disease and surgical subtypes that we're bringing out. And then we're looking at outcomes across those groups. So we do have certain angles that we're looking for that, and it's just kind of descriptive epidemiology in that sense. Yeah.
So we were talking yesterday about weight bearing, I understand it, and I was asking people in the room who would be prepared to do a trial in weight bearing, and many people, their countries have moved to a place where we don't have equipoise. But we can leverage the fact that we're not all in the same place. And I wonder whether one of the really early powerful wins here is we look at the natural experiment of worldwide hip fracture care. We look at the natural variation that exists and to what extent that does or doesn't associate with outcomes that we value. Because we are running a huge natural experiment. And there we don't need to do any prospective work. We just need to use the data we've already collected. So it would be a very fast win, and I think very powerful. One way that we can utilize our variation that it's actually very difficult to do at a national level.
Thanks. That's really helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.